Over the past couple of months, I've had a lot of you calling and emailing going, hey, can you kind of explain this ending the lease agreement and how it works and the notices, and do you have a copy of the notice? So I'm going to explain how it works in this video. Hey everyone, welcome to another video. If we're meeting for the first time, my name is Paul Vojchehoske, and I run this YouTube channel up here all around. It's called NebraskaLandlord.com. It's just a place, a portal where landlords and property managers in Nebraska can get free forms, free advice, free information on what's happening in the landlord-tenant community. In today's video, we're going to talk about the 30-day notice. Now, a 30-day notice in Nebraska is used for a lot of things. We use it to change the operating hours of a laundry room or a workout facility within an apartment community. We use it to raise the rents. But probably the most common is when we end tenancy. And quite frankly, for whatever reason, the last couple of months, I've been getting a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from you folks going, hey, can you explain this 30-day notice thing to me? And oh, by the way, do you have a copy of a 30-day notice I can use to end tenancy? That's the most common question I've been getting. So I thought I'd do a video and kind of cover it here. So the 30-day notice is required, first of all, to end the lease agreement. Now, a couple of things with this. Number one, it's a requirement that it's a notice that the landlord or the tenant uses, either one. So if the landlord doesn't want to renew the lease at the end of the period, they would serve, or they must serve, the tenant a 30-day notice. If the tenant wants to end the lease agreement, then they also have to serve a 30-day notice. And one thing I also want to make sure that you understand, because a lot of people don't know this, if it's a fixed expiration lease, so it's a one-year lease, and that lease is expiring on, let's say, April 30th, there still has to be a 30-day notice given by either party. So if the tenant wants to end it, the tenant has to give the proper 30-day notice. And if the landlord is not wanting to renew the lease with that tenant, then the landlord has to give the tenant the same 30-day notice, even if it's a fixed expiration. That's one of those things that a lot of people don't know. So let's run through the math here of how this notice works. So notice it's a 30-day notice. Now, it's not always an exact 30-day notice. We just call it that. So let's say in our scenario, our lease agreement, it's a one-year lease agreement and it ends April 30th, or maybe it's a month-to-month. Either way, the scenario is the same. Our lease agreement is ending on April 30th. The tenant would have to give notice on or before March 31st to give notice to the landlord that they're going to end the lease agreement on April 30th. Same with the landlord. So if the landlord's like, I'm not going to renew my lease with this tenant, and the lease ends on April 30th, then the landlord would have to give the notice to the tenant on or before March 31st. Very important. And I highly recommend that anytime notices are given, that you give more than even the 30-day notice. Give a 45-day notice if there's something in the lease that doesn't specify an alternative time frame. Okay? As we described, explained, it's for the landlord or the tenant to use. So what does the statute say? The statute says you have to give a 30-day notice, and I explain the process here. One thing I would tell you, a lot of leases have what we call alternate notice requirements. So some leases will say that a 60-day notice, the tenant has to give a 60-day notice of the termination of the lease agreement, which is fine. The statute does allow that. But here's one thing you have to remember. If you're going to require the tenant to give a 60-day notice, you as the landlord also has to abide by the same rule. You have to give your tenant a 60-day notice that you are not going to renew the lease with them. So whatever your lease says, you also have to abide by it as well. All right, unless there's some alternative language in there that says the tenant has 60 days, but I only have 30, which is very uncommon. And I can tell you judges don't like it. So keep it very, very consistent. So here's what happens. Let's say your tenant gives you notice on April 2nd, their 30-day notice that they're going to end. Now, they have a fixed expiration lease, and that lease ends on April 30th. In this case, because they did not give the proper notice requirement, so what happens is their lease actually is extended one additional month, so they're responsible for that rent and utilities up until the end of May. That's why I'm saying the 30-day notice really isn't a 30-day notice in many cases. So because they were late that one extra day, that tolls the expiration all the way one additional month. Same thing applies for the landlord. If the landlord says, listen, I don't want to renew the lease, and you serve them the notice on April 2nd, they have a right to stay there whether you want them to or not till the end of May. So you got to make sure that your dates and when you serve notices are done in accordance with the statute. One last thing, I'm not going to get into service and receipt dates and all that. I have another video that talks about the specific requirements on how notices are supposed to be done according to the statute. So you might want to take a look at that video too. So that's all I got. A couple of things, if you would please, leave comments and questions. There's sections down below here where you can leave a question. I will answer any question that you have. Or leave a comment. I would appreciate that. Also, make sure you subscribe. There's a little red subscribe button on the right-hand side of your screen there. And hit the little bell way up in the top right-hand corner. It's probably up on this side because I'm looking at the camera here. It's a little bell. Click on that and it'll notify you every time that I upload a new video. That's all I have for this video. Until next time, happy landlording.